Blood trickled down Kai's arm as he pressed himself against the twisted blue bark of the alien tree. The predator's hissing breath came in measured intervals from somewhere to his left. 3 days of hunting, and now he was the prey. 2 years on Zentus had taught Kai that death arrived silently. The six-legged stalker, what the locals called a shrikehound, had tracked him for miles through the indigo forest. One wrong move, and its venomous mandibles would pierce his throat. "Not today," Kai whispered, tightening his grip on the makeshift spear, a shaft of hardened zentwood tipped with metal, salvaged from the wreckage that had become his wife's tomb. The memory flashed before him. Maya's face to Maya, eyes wide with terror as the ship's hull tore open, her hands slipping from his grasp as the emergency pod separated. The last transmission, garbled through static. "Love you, Peter, me," but there had been no one to find. The shrikehound rounded the tree, faster than Kai anticipated. He thrust the spear forward with all his strength, feeling it sink into flesh. But his aim was off. Instead of the throat, he'd pierced the creature's shoulder. The shrikehound roared, its 4 eyes blazing with primal fury. Kai rolled aside as jaws snapped where his head had been. He scrambled for the knife at his belt, the last gift from Earth, forged steel that had outlasted everything else from his former life. The creature lunged again. This time Kai drove the blade upward, finding the soft underside of the beast's jaw. Hot, purple blood gushed over his hands. The shrikehound convulsed, then collapsed. "I'm still here, Maya," he whispered to the empty forest, "still surviving." The Zarian settlement of Narabek rose from the dusty plains like a twisted coral reef, its blue-tinged structures growing organically from the ground in sparse spirals and curves unknown to human architecture. Kai approached cautiously, carrying valuable trade goods, hides and venom sacs harvested from his kill. Guards stood at the entrance, tall, slender figures with blue-hued skin that shimmered with iridescent patterns. Their eyes, 4 pupilled orbs, narrowed as Kai approached. "Trade," Kai said in their language, the word coming out harsh from his human throat. He gestured to his pack. "Hunt goods, trade." The market square buzzed with activity. Zarians moved with fluid grace between stalls, their bodies thin and agile compared to Kai's stockier human frame. He made his way to the metalworker's stall to trade for desperately needed arrowheads. As they haggled, Kai's attention was drawn to a commotion on the far side of the square. A crowd had gathered, their neck frills flashing patterns of blue and orange, indicators of disapproval and deceit. Through gaps between the tall Zarian bodies, he glimpsed a female Zarian standing in the center, her head bowed in shame. Unlike the others, whose bodies were sleek and angular, she was noticeably fuller, her form curved in a way that seemed almost human by comparison. Beside her stood an older male, his neck frills extended in patterns of bright orange, a display of anger. Kai edged closer, catching fragments of the heated exchange. The older male, the female's father, was publicly severing a marriage contract. The reason, repeated with increasing volume, was the female's excessive mass and inability to survive the wilds. The father produced a ceremonial knife and severed a braided cord that had connected their wrists, the physical representation of the family bond. With a final declaration that echoed across the square, he turned and walked away, leaving his daughter standing alone in the circle of onlookers. The crowd began to disperse, some brushing deliberately against the abandoned female, causing her to stumble. Kai felt an unexpected surge of anger. Before he could rationalize his actions, he stepped forward into the clearing space around the female. The remaining Zarians paused, their attention shifting to the human interloper, with ripples of surprise across their frills. The female looked up, her 4 pupilled eyes widening at the sight of Kai. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns across her blue skin, more complex than most Zarians he'd encountered. Her fuller form, so derided by her people, struck Kai as potentially advantageous in a survival situation. Fat stored energy. Energy meant life in the unforgiving wilds of Zentos. Kai reached for the newly repaired knife at his belt, his most valuable possession, the last link to Earth. The blade caught the light as he held it out, palm up, in the traditional Zarian offering posture. "I claim this contract," he said in careful Zarian, the words feeling strange on his tongue. The female's skin rippled with patterns Kai couldn't interpret. Shock, confusion, perhaps consideration. The remaining onlookers froze, their own frills displaying unprecedented patterns that Kai guessed represented disbelief or scandal. After what seemed an eternity, the female extended her six-fingered hand, hovering it above the offered knife. "My name is Lyra," she said, her voice melodious, in a way Kai hadn't expected. "And I accept your claim." The journey back to Kai's camp was arduous. The terrain, a treacherous mix of jagged stone formations and dense alien vegetation, had always been challenging even for Kai alone. With Lyra, it became an exercise in patience. "We should rest," Kai suggested as Lyra struggled to navigate a particularly steep incline. Her breath came in labored whistles, the Zarian equivalent of panting. "I can continue," she insisted, though her skin had taken on a pale lavender hue that Kai recognized as exhaustion. "Nightfall soon," he said, pointing to the horizon where Zentus's twin suns were beginning their descent. "Predators active. Better to make camp." As Kai gathered wood for a fire, Lyra surveyed their surroundings with methodical attention that surprised him. She moved from plant to plant, occasionally kneeling to examine something at ground level. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Cataloging," she replied. "This ridge has 17 varieties of edible vegetation within sight." She pointed to various plants. "Those tubers can be eaten raw and contain moisture. Those provide protein when dried, and that neutralizes the venom of 6 different predator species when applied to wounds." Kai stared at her with newfound respect. "How do you know this?" Lyra's skin flickered briefly with a pattern he hadn't seen before. Perhaps embarrassment or pride. "I studied. While others trained for hunting and warfare, I learned about survival flora. My father called it will waste time, for one who moves too slowly to flee danger." Her 4 pupils contracted slightly. He was not wrong about my speed. As darkness fell, they sat beside the small fire. Its light cast strange shadows across Lyra's features, highlighting the alien geometry of her face. "Why did you claim me?" Lyra asked suddenly, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "You know nothing of me." Kai poked at the fire, watching sparks spiral upward. "I know what it's like to be alone on this planet." "That is not an answer." He sighed. 2 years ago, my ship crashed. My wife didn't survive. I've been alone since then." He gestured vaguely to the wilderness around them. "Out here, practical decisions keep you alive. Your build stores energy better than the typical Zarian form. You know plants I don't. I hunt better than I forage." He met her gaze across the fire. It seemed logical. Lyra's skin rippled with a complex pattern. "Logical," she repeated, the word hanging between them like a barrier. "I meant no offense," Kai added quickly. "In human terms, your form would be considered—" He searched for a diplomatic word. "Fat," Lyra supplied flatly. "The word translates directly enough." "Voluptuous," Kai corrected. "On Earth, many cultures considered such traits beautiful, signs of prosperity." "Not here," Lyra said, her frills flattening against her neck. "Here, it means weakness, inability to move quickly when predators come." They lapsed into silence, each lost in private thoughts, as the alien stars emerged overhead. Kai's camp turned out to be more permanent than Lyra had expected. Nestled against a cliff face and partially built into a shallow cave, The dwelling showed signs of careful construction and adaptation to the environment. "You grew this?" Lyra asked, examining the living walls of interwoven zentwood that formed the outer structure. "Copied what I observed in Zarian settlements," Kai explained as he secured the entry flap behind them. "Took nearly a year to understand how to manipulate the growth patterns." The interior was sparse, but ingeniously organized. One section served as sleeping quarters, with a raised platform covered in cured animal hides. Another contained storage, handcrafted containers holding preserved foods, tools, and supplies. A central fire pit featured a sophisticated ventilation system, channeling smoke out through the rock. Lyra moved through the space, taking inventory with practiced efficiency. "Impressive for a solitary human," she said finally, "but insufficient for extended survival." Kai's expression tightened. "It's kept me alive for 2 years." "Barely," Lyra observed, pointing to a poorly healed scar on Kai's forearm. "That's fungal infection. Untreated. Could have killed you." She moved to a stack of dried plants. "These are stored incorrectly. Half have lost medicinal properties." She examined his food stores with critical eyes. Nutritional imbalance evident in preserved selections. Kai felt a flash of defensiveness. "I'm still standing." "Standing is not thriving," Lyra replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "But together, improvements are possible." That night, they slept on opposite sides of the fire pit, each acutely aware of the other's presence. For Kai, having another breathing being in his space after 2 years of solitude was profoundly unsettling. For Lyra, the vulnerability of sleeping in a strange place with a species she barely understood required tremendous trust. Neither slept well, but both survived until morning, the first benchmark of success on Zentosisos. Their days fell into a pattern of complementary skills. Kai hunted, maintained their defenses, and scouted the surrounding territory. Lyra transformed their dwelling's interior, implementing storage systems that preserved their resources with greater efficiency. She cultivated medicinal gardens around the perimeter, explaining each plant's properties with the precision of a scientist. "You were not always a potential bride," Kai observed one evening as she meticulously labeled a new batch of remedies. "Your knowledge is too specialized." Lyra's skin dimmed slightly. "I trained as a knowledge keeper before my father arranged the marriage contract." Her frills flattened. "When my body developed incorrectly, such positions became unavailable." "Because of your build? What does that have to do with knowledge?" "Knowledge keepers must travel between settlements, carrying critical information," she explained. "The position requires physical capability for long journeys. When I failed physical assessments, my father sought to salvage my value through marriage." Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that froze them both. A low, keening wail that drifted through the twilight. Kai reached instinctively for his spear. "Stalker," he whispered. Lyra's frills pressed flat against her neck. "Hunting call, seeking prey location." "It's not alone," Kai added, recognizing the pattern of calls now echoing from different directions. "Pack hunting, they're surrounding this area." Throughout the night, they reinforced the dwelling's defense, sharpening stakes to place around the perimeter, preparing fire bundles that could be quickly ignited, positioning weapons at strategic points. Lyra worked alongside Kai without complaint, her movements slower but methodical. The night dissolved into a blur of desperate combat. Stalkers attacked in waves, first testing, then committing fully when they sensed vulnerability. Kai lost count of how many they killed or wounded. His world narrowed to the mechanical repetition of knock, draw, release. When his arrows ran out, he switched to spear and knife. Through it all, Lyra maintained her position beside him, not behind as he'd ordered, but alongside. Her movements lacked the speed and agility of a Zarian hunter, but she compensated with precision and anticipation. She seemed to sense where attacks would come before they materialized, shifting their defenses accordingly. Dawn broke with the realization that the attacks had ceased. The ground around their dwelling was littered with stalker corpses, 9 in total, a devastating blow to any pack. Kai sank to his knees, exhaustion overtaking adrenaline. Blood, both his and the stalker's, covered his arms and chest. A deep gash across his shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. "Need to treat that," Lyra said, already gathering her medicinal supplies. Stalker claws carry bacteria. As she cleaned and dressed his wounds with practiced efficiency, Kai observed, "You fought well." Lyra's frills rippled with a pattern he now recognized as modest acknowledgement. "Different strengths," she replied. "Adaptation, not conformity." Kai felt something unfamiliar stir within him. The first warmth of connection he'd experienced since Maya's death. It wasn't romance or even friendship yet, but something more fundamental. Respect. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their shared existence deepened. Kai found himself adjusting his routines to accommodate Lyra's presence, not out of obligation, but from genuine appreciation for her contributions. Their dwelling expanded as Lyra applied her knowledge of Zentwood cultivation to grow additional rooms, a dedicated space for her expanding medicinal garden, improved storage areas, even a bathing chamber that collected rainwater. Their communication evolved as well. Lyra's English improved rapidly, while Kai made halting progress with the more complex aspects of the Zarian language. They developed a hybrid vocabulary, unique to their partnership, with terms that bridged the gap between their species. One evening, as they sat cataloging the day's harvests, Kai found himself studying Lyra's movements. There was an economy to her actions, a deliberate precision that he'd come to rely upon. "Something troubles you?" Lyra asked, noticing his attention. "Thinking about adaptations. Your people value speed and agility because it suits their hunting methods. Humans value different traits depending on environment and culture." "And what did humans value?" Lyra asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity. "Varied widely," Kai explained. "Some cultures prized physical strength, others intelligence, or artistic ability. Physical ideals changed constantly. What was considered beautiful in one era was rejected in another." "What about you?" Kai asked, realizing how little he knew of her personal history beyond her rejection. "Before the marriage contract, what was your life?" "I was born during the Great Drought," she began. "Many Zarian young died that season. Food scarcity. I survived because of this." She gestured to her fuller form. "Even as a child, my body stored energy efficiently. While others withered, I endured. When abundance returned, my survival trait became liability. Other children grew tall, slender, swift. I remained different. I turned to study. If body would not conform, mind would compensate. Learned botanical identification, medicinal properties, growth patterns. Became youngest assistant knowledge keeper in settlement history." Her skin briefly brightened with pride before dimming. Then maturation brought more pronounced difference. Physical assessments failed. Knowledge keeper path closed. "That's when the marriage arrangement happened," Kai guessed. Before she could answer, a sound outside the dwelling froze them both. The distinctive snap of a branch under weight, too heavy to be natural wildlife. They exchanged glances, instantly alert. A voice called from the darkness. A deep, resonant Zarian voice that caused Lyra's skin to illuminate briefly with shock. "Father?" she whispered in disbelief. "Daughter," the voice confirmed. "We come under peace protocol. Emergence permitted?" 3 figures emerged from the darkness into the moonlight of the clearing. At the center stood a tall Zarian male, whose elaborate neck frills marked him as an elder of significant status. Flanking him were 2 younger males carrying ceremonial spears, family guards, based on their matching skin patterns. I am Tarek, Pathfinder Elder of Narabek Settlement, father of Lyra, the Elder announced. I come to verify contract fulfillment. Contract was claimed publicly, Kai responded. Verification unnecessary. Interspecies claims require supervision, Tarek countered. Settlement Council mandate. It was a lie. Kai had learned enough about Zarian customs to recognize the fabrication. There was no such mandate, but challenging an elder directly would violate protocols and potentially create danger. What followed was a meticulous examination of every aspect of their living arrangement. The elder inspected food stores, questioning preservation techniques. He tested structural integrity, water purification methods, defensive positions. Throughout, his questions were pointed, clearly seeking deficiencies. Human hunting inadequate for two, he declared, examining Kai's meat stores. Supplemented by botanical nutrition, Lyra countered, displaying her extensive collection of edible and medicinal plants. Balanced diet exceeds settlement standards. For each criticism, they presented countermeasures and adaptations. When he questioned defensive capabilities, Kai demonstrated the stalker kills and their repurposing of predator materials. When he challenged winter preparedness, Lyra revealed her cultivation of cold-resistant food sources. Finally, visibly frustrated, Tarek confronted them directly. Physical limitations remained, he stated, gesturing to Lyra. Form prevents effective evacuation in crises. Compromises human survival potential. Before Lyra could respond, Kai stepped forward. With respect, Elder, survival on Zentos requires more than physical speed. Intelligence, adaptation, complementary skills. These determine survival outcomes, not conformity to physical ideals. Human philosophy, Tarek dismissed, not Zarian reality. Reality is results, Kai countered, indicating the evidence of their thriving partnership. We have survived predator attacks that would overwhelm single defenders, created sustainability impossible for solitary individuals. The Elder and Lyra exchanged rapid Zarian that Kai couldn't follow. The exchange continued for several minutes, growing increasingly intense. Finally, Tarek's frills expanded fully. He spoke one final phrase in Zarian, then turned to Kai. Partnership recognized, he stated in English. Settlement records will reflect permanent status. His 4 pupils contracted to pinpoints. But conditions apply. What conditions? Kai asked cautiously. Seasonal knowledge exchange, Tarek said. Daughter possesses valuable botanical information. Must return to settlement quarterly to update knowledge archives. Kai glanced at Lyra, whose skin was rippling with complex patterns, suggesting conflicting emotions. Her choice, he said firmly. I accept this condition, Lyra said after a moment's consideration. Knowledge sharing benefits all. Tarek nodded once, sharply. Second condition. Partnership must demonstrate continued viability through offspring within 2 cycles. Kai stared at the Elder, certain he had misunderstood. Offspring? Between different species? Not biological reproduction, Lyra clarified quickly, her skin flushing with patterns Kai interpreted as embarrassment. Apprentice training. Must accept and train young Zarian in survival methods. Teaching, Kai translated, relief evident in his voice. Why? Partnership model potentially valuable, Tarek admitted reluctantly. If sustainable, may benefit others seeking non-traditional paths. Acceptable, Kai agreed, when time comes. With that, Tarek and his guards departed without further ceremony, disappearing into the forest as abruptly as they had appeared. 6 months passed, marking a full seasonal cycle on Zentos. The harsh winter months tested their partnership in ways neither had anticipated, with blizzards that lasted weeks and temperatures that froze unprotected skin on contact. Yet they not only survived but adapted, combining Kai's engineering skills with Lyra's botanical knowledge to create more efficient heating systems and cold-resistant food sources. When spring finally arrived, a dramatic thaw that transformed the landscape almost overnight, they emerged from their dwelling to find the world renewed. Vibrant blue vegetation erupted from ground that had been frozen solid days earlier. The air filled with the calls of returning flying creatures and the scent of blooming flora. Renewal cycle begins, Lyra observed, as they surveyed the changed landscape from the elevated platform they had built for observation. Most dangerous time. Kai nodded, well aware of the paradox of spring on Zentos. The explosion of life brought predators out of hibernation, hungry and aggressive after the long winter. Territorial disputes reached their peak as creatures fought over prime breeding locations. As the days lengthened, they began preparations for Lyra's first quarterly visit to the settlement, the knowledge exchange that had been a condition of their partnership's recognition. Though neither spoke of it directly, the impending separation caused a subtle tension between them. "Journey takes 3 days," Lyra said as they packed provisions for her trip. "Exchange protocols require 2 days minimum. Return journey 3 days. 8 days total absence." Kai secured another water container in her pack. "I'll accompany you to the river crossing. After that, settlement paths are safer." Lyra's skin flickered with patterns Kai had learned to interpret as concern. 8 days alone. Sufficient supplies prepared? "I survived 2 years before you arrived," Kai reminded her with a wry smile. "Think I can manage 8 days." "Different now," Lyra said quietly. "Adaptations made for 2. Systems integrated." The morning of her departure dawned clear and warm. They walked in companionable silence along the path toward Narabek, each lost in private thoughts. At the river crossing, a natural boundary between the wilds and the more patrolled territories near the settlement, they paused. "This is where we part," Kai said, surveying the rushing water that had been a mere trickle during the dry season. The Zarians had built a suspension bridge of living vines that swayed gently in the breeze. Lyra extended her 6-fingered hand in the human gesture Kai had taught her. "Until return," she said simply. Kai took her hand, the blue skin cool against his palm. "Until return," he echoed. Lyra crossed the bridge with careful steps, her form silhouetted against the morning light. At the far side, she paused to look back once, her skin flashing briefly with patterns too distant for Kai to interpret. Then she continued on, disappearing into the dense undergrowth of the settlement path. The first 3 days of Lyra's absence passed uneventfully. But as night fell on the 4th day, Kai found himself listening for the sound of her movement in the dwelling, expecting comments or observations that didn't come. On the 5th day, strange weather moved in from the west, a phenomenon the Zarians called ghost storms. Unlike normal precipitation, these clouds carried microscopic organisms that fed on certain metals, potentially damaging weapons and tools left exposed. Kai worked quickly to secure their equipment, grateful for Lyra's warning about these seasonal events. As he covered the last of their metal implements, a sound from outside froze him in place, the distinctive scrape of claws on stone. He reached silently for his bow, knocking an arrow as he moved to the observation slot. Through the narrow opening, he caught movement at the edge of the clearing, a flash of scaled hide, much larger than any stalker. "Ridge hunter," he whispered in disbelief. Ridge hunters rarely ventured this far from the high peaks. Standing nearly twice his height at the shoulder, the ridge hunter combined the worst features of Earth's prehistoric predators: the mass of a tyrannosaurus, the speed of a raptor, and the climbing ability of a mountain goat. Its scales shifted color slightly as it moved, a rudimentary camouflage adaptation. A single ridge hunter had been known to decimate entire Zarian hunting parties. Against one human, Alons. Kai stepped back from the observation slot, mind racing. The dwelling's defenses were designed for stalkers and smaller threats, not something of this magnitude. Direct confrontation would be sissy. His eyes fell on Lyra's collection of botanical preparations. Among them were compounds designed to mask scent, others to repel specific predators, none specifically for ridge hunters. But perhaps he worked frantically, combining preparations based on his limited understanding of Lyra's system. The result was a pungent mixture that made his eyes water. Without testing, there was no time. He spread it around the dwelling's perimeter, hoping it would at least confuse the predator's sense. Night fell, bringing no relief. The ridge hunter remained, occasionally testing the dwelling's exterior with powerful claws that left deep gouges in the zentwood walls. The structure would not withstand a determined assault. Kai spent the night moving between defensive positions, grabbing moments of fitful sleep when the predator temporarily withdrew. By morning, exhaustion clouded his thinking, but the ridge hunter showed no sign of abandoning its siege. Think, Kai muttered to himself. What would Lyra suggest? The answer came as he sorted through their supplies, a container of paste Lyra had prepared before departing, labeled with Zarian symbols he recognized as extreme deterrent. She'd warned him only to use it in dire circumstances, as the scent attracted smaller predators, even as it repelled larger ones. A desperate plan formed. If he could drive the ridge hunter away, he could handle smaller threats more easily. Waiting for the predator to move to the far side of the clearing on its patrol circuit, Kai slipped out through their secondary exit, a narrow tunnel they'd excavated as an emergency escape. He circled wide through the underbrush, carrying the potent deterrent and a torch. The ridge hunter sensed him before he completed his approach. It whirled with surprising speed, jaws gaping to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Kai froze, fighting the instinctive urge to flee. Running would trigger the predator's chase response, certain death. Instead, he slowly raised the container, removed the seal, and hurled it directly at the creature's sensory organs, located along its neck. The ridge hunter reared back as the paste splattered across its scales. The restriction was immediate and violent. The massive predator emitted a high-pitched keening that shattered the morning stillness. Kai retreated steadily, maintaining eye contact, torch ready. The ridge hunter thrashed its head from side to side, trying to dislodge the offending substance. When that failed, it began backing away, its color shifting rapidly in what Kai guessed was the equivalent of extreme distress. With a final roar that shook the ground beneath Kai's feet, the ridge hunter turned and crashed back into the forest, moving with single-minded purpose away from the clearing and the scent that had assaulted its senses. The next 2 days became a brutal cycle of defending against waves of smaller threats, attracted by the lingering deterrent. Stalkers, barb lizards, even a pack of tree leapers that normally avoided human settlements, all converged on the clearing, drawn by the powerful scent. Kai killed what he could and drove off the rest. But exhaustion took its toll. A stalker's claw caught his leg during one skirmish, leaving a deep gash that he hastily bandaged with Lyra's medicinal preparations. By the 7th day, the day before Lyra was due to return, fever set in. He recognized the symptoms of infection spreading, despite the treatments. Without Lyra's expertise to properly clean and dress the wound, the bacteria were gaining ground. His vision blurred, his movements slowed, and maintaining the dwelling's defenses became increasingly difficult. One more day, he told himself repeatedly, fighting to stay conscious as he checked the perimeter. Just one more day. But as night fell on the 7th day, Kai collapsed near the fire pit, his strength finally giving out. The fever dreams came then, visions of Earth, of Maya, of the crash that had stranded him on this alien world. In his delirium, he thought he heard Lyra's voice calling his name, but knew it couldn't be real. She wasn't due back until tomorrow. The sensation of cool 6-fingered hands against his forehead finally penetrated the fever haze. Kai struggled to open his eyes, certain he was hallucinating. "Don't move," Lyra's voice, real, not imagined, commanded. "Infection advanced, requires immediate treatment." Kai tried to speak, managed only a hoarse whisper. "You're early." "Sensed trouble," she replied, already applying a pungent paste to his wounded leg. "Connection inexplicable but functional." Hurried return. Through the fog of fever, Kai registered the state of their dwelling, the signs of multiple attacks, the depleted supplies, the defensive preparations he'd made in desperation. Lyra worked efficiently, moving between treating his wound and reinforcing their compromised defenses. "Ridge Hunter," he managed to explain. Lyra's skin paled. "Deterrent used," she observed, noticing the empty container. "Effective but attracted secondary predators. Correct assessment, but dangerous execution." "Had no choice," Kai murmured, as a cooling sensation spread from the medicine she applied. "Rest now," Lyra instructed. "We'll defend until recovery." He drifted in and out of consciousness. Over the next day, aware sometimes of Lyra moving around the dwelling, other times of the sounds of conflict outside. Once, he woke to find her treating a wound on her own arm, a deep cut that she bandaged efficiently before returning to guard duty. When clarity finally returned, Kai found himself on their sleeping platform, covered with insulating hides. The dwelling was quiet, except for the soft sounds of Lyra preparing something at the fire pit. "How long?" Kai asked, his voice rough. 3 days since returned," she answered, bringing him a steaming cup of liquid. "Fever broken yesterday. Infection contained, but weakness persists." "You were hurt," he said, noticing new marks on her blue skin. Injuries sustained in his defense. Lyra's frills flattened in dismissal. "Minor damage, self-treated." "I put you at risk," Kai said, the realization weighing heavily. "My decisions were logical under circumstances," she interrupted. "Ridge Hunter threat required extreme measures, survival achieved." Her four-pupiled eyes met his directly. "Partnership functions as designed." "The settlement visit," Kai remembered suddenly. "Did you complete the knowledge exchange?" "Partial completion," Lyra replied. "Sufficient to satisfy conditions. Will complete next cycle." Kai absorbed this information with growing understanding. "You sensed something was wrong and left early." Lyra's skin flickered with patterns he'd come to associate with discomfort at discussing intuitive matters. Experienced unease, persistent concern for dwelling safety. She paused, seeming to search for words. Father Elder calls it bond sense, rare but documented between long-term survival partners. "You felt that I was in danger," Kai translated. "Imprecise but essentially correct," she acknowledged. "Not telepathy as humans conceptualize, more subtle awareness. Evolutionary advantage for pair-bonded Zarians in ancient times." 1 year after Kai had claimed Lyra in the marketplace, the settlement elders fulfilled their requirement by sending an apprentice to study their survival methods. The young Zarian who arrived at their dwelling was visibly nervous, his skin flickering with anxiety patterns as he took in the human Zarian dwelling and its occupants. "I am Nivan." He introduced himself with formal Zarian gestures, sent by Elder Council to learn survival adaptations. His frills flattened in obvious discomfort as he added, "Honored to study with unusual partnership." "Welcome, Nivan." Lyra responded with proper formality. "Dwelling space prepared for your cycle of learning." The young Zarian, physically typical of his species with the slender, agile build prized by their culture, followed them inside with visible trepidation. His discomfort increased as he observed their integrated living arrangements, the hybrid systems that combined human ingenuity with Zarian traditional knowledge. The first weeks of Nevin's apprenticeship were marked by awkwardness and resistance. He struggled to adjust to their methods, frequently suggesting proper Zarian approaches that Kai and Lyra had long since modified or abandoned, as unsuitable for their particular circumstances. Ridge slope hunting requires speed and agility, Navan insisted one morning, as they prepared for a hunting expedition. His 4 pupils contracted as he glanced at Lyra. Traditional teaching says heavy-form Zarians remain at dwelling for such hunts. Traditional teaching assumes Zarian hunting parties, Kai replied evenly. We are not traditional. Lyra's knowledge of ridge predator behavior essential, he continued, securing his bow. Her observation skills compensate for different movement patterns. The day's lessons unfolded not as Kai and Lyra had planned, but as Xentos itself dictated. Midway through the hunt, the weather shifted suddenly. A toxic pollen storm rolling in from the western valleys. Such storms could cause temporary blindness or respiratory distress if one was caught unprepared. Shelter needed immediately, Lyra announced, recognizing the telltale yellow tinge to the clouds. No time to return to dwelling. Nevin's skin paled with alarm. Nearest cave system 3 kilometers south, he said, frills flattening in distress. Cannot outrun storm. Don't need to, Kai replied calmly, already gathering specific broad-leafed plants Lyra had identified. We create shelter here. Working with practiced efficiency, they constructed a temporary enclosure using the waxy leaves as a natural barrier against the toxic particles. Lyra prepared a salve for their exposed skin and a tea that would counteract any pollen they might inhale. Navan watched their coordinated efforts with growing wonder, his skepticism giving way to genuine interest. When the storm hit, their shelter held. While they could hear other creatures in the distance crying out in distress, they remained protected by their combined knowledge. This technique not taught in settlement, Navan observed as they waited out the storm. Because it requires knowledge integration, Lyra explained. Human construction methods with Zarian botanical application. The true breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when a hunting expedition went catastrophically wrong. A rock slide separated Nevin from Kai and Lyra, leaving the young Zarian trapped in a narrow ravine with a pack of stalkers closing in. His speed and agility, the traits his culture prized above all others, were useless in the confined space. Kai and Lyra reached him just as the predators attacked. What followed was a desperate battle against overwhelming odds. Navan fought with traditional Zarian techniques, all flowing movement and pre strikes. Kai relied on raw power and improvised weapons. Lyra, slower than both but strategically brilliant, directed their combined efforts, identifying vulnerabilities in the stalkers' coordinated attacks. When the last predator retreated, all 3 were wounded but alive. As they bound each other's injuries with Lyra's medicinal preparations, Nevin's skin displayed patterns Kai had never seen before. I acknowledge error, the young Zarian said formally, diversity of approach superior to singular method in unpredictable scenarios. Lyra's frills rippled with what Kai now recognized as her version of a smile. Learning occurs when experience challenges assumption, she said, true for all species. From that day forward, Nevin's apprenticeship transformed. He approached their lessons with genuine openness, absorbing not just the practical skills they taught, but the philosophy underlying their partnership. By the time his training cycle neared completion, the young Zarian had himself adapted in ways that surprised them all. 5 years after Kai claimed Lyra in the marketplace, the Adaptation Center had grown into a thriving community, unlike anything previously seen on Xentos. Built at the confluence of 3 ecological zones, it incorporated elements of human and Zarian design, while pioneering new approaches specific to its unique purpose. The central structures blended the organic growth methods of Zarian architecture with the structural engineering principles humans had brought from Earth. Living Zentwood frameworks supported modular components salvaged from crashed ships creating spaces that could be reconfigured as needs evolved. Around these core buildings, experimental gardens tested hybrid cultivation techniques, while defensive perimeters demonstrated new approaches to predator management. More remarkable than the physical infrastructure was the social ecosystem developing within it. Humans who had survived in isolation for years worked alongside Zarians who had broken from traditional paths. Young apprentices from both species trained together, learning to value diverse traits and approaches rather than conforming to rigid ideals. On the 5th anniversary of their marketplace meeting, a date they now marked with private significance, Kai and Lyra took a rare day away from their administrative duties to return to their original dwelling. Though they maintained formal residence at the center, they had preserved their first home as both retreat and reminder of their beginnings. As they approached through the familiar forest path, now much easier to traverse, thanks to the knowledge of safe routes they had mapped over years, Kai felt a sense of homecoming that transcended the physical location. Still standing, he observed as they entered the clearing. Still adapting, Lyra added, noting how the Zentwood walls had strengthened and expanded subtly in their absence. Inside, they found everything as they had left it during their last visit. Simpler than their current accommodations, but perfectly suited to their needs. They fell easily into old routines, Kai checking the perimeter while Lyra inspected the interior systems. As evening approached, they sat together outside, watching Zentus's twin suns descending toward the horizon. The familiar landscape spread before them. The ridge where they had hunted. The valley where they had harvested medicinal plants. The distant peaks where ridge hunters still roamed. "Sometimes I forget how far we've come," Kai said, breaking the comfortable silence. "From that first day, when you could barely make it back here from the settlement." Lyra's skin rippled with amusement. From human who could not identify basic medicinal plants. "We were disasters," Kai laughed. "Separately, at least." "Together, sufficient," Lyra corrected. "Now, more than sufficient, thriving." As darkness fell and the alien stars emerged overhead, Kai found himself reflecting on the complex path that had led him to this moment. The devastating loss of Maya and the crash that had stranded him on this hostile world had seemed like an ending. Yet somehow, through that very devastation, he had found his way to this unexpected life with this extraordinary being from another species. "That day in the marketplace, Kai Bium, when I offered the contract claim, you accepted immediately, without knowing anything about me, except that I was human. Why?" Lyra's skin dimmed slightly. "Complex decision. Multiple factors." She paused, seeming to organize her thoughts. "Primary, survival calculation. Options limited. But why trust an unknown human over known quantities?" "Not unknown entirely," Lyra corrected. "Observed you before. Previous market visits noted careful resource management, respectful interactions, effective adaptations to Zarian environments." Her skin brightened slightly. "Survival potential assessed as high." The revelation surprised Kai. "You were watching me. All those times I came to trade." "Knowledge keeper training included observation of all species," she explained. "Special interest in successful adaptations. You demonstrated Onishi capacity." "There's more," Lyra continued unexpectedly. "Secondary factor. You looked at me differently." "Differently how?" "Others saw defeat," she said simply. "You saw person. Adaptation rather than failure. Potential rather than limitation." Her skin flickered with complex patterns, suggesting emotional depth. Rare experience. That night, as they prepared their evening meal together in their original dwelling, Kai found himself watching Lyra with new awareness. The alien contours of her face and body had become familiar over their years together. Her movements around their shared space, once strange and disconcerting, now felt natural, even complementary to his own. 5 years, he mused, from marketplace claim to adaptation center. From survival arrangement to partnership, Lyra added, from necessity to choice. The distinction resonated deeply. What had begun as cold calculation had transformed into something chosen freely, day after day, year after year. Not the passionate romance of human stories, but something perhaps more profound. A deliberate building of connection across differences that once seemed insurmountable. As sleep approached, Kai reached across the space between them, finding Lyra's hand in the familiar gesture that had become their nightly ritual. 6 fingers intertwined with 5, a physical representation of their unlikely union. Together we adapt, he murmured, echoing the words that had become both private pledge and public philosophy. Together we thrive. Lyra completed the exchange, her voice soft in the darkness. The marketplace contract, claimed in desperation and sealed with a knife of earth steel, had grown into something no formal agreement could have anticipated. A partnership that was changing a world, one adaptation at a time.